walk around with it. Right now we're at the south end of the studio, and this house was built in 1874. I bought it in 1998, and we rehabbed it and moved in 99, January of 99. Originally, the house was built as a business residence, meaning that the shop, whatever type it was, would be on the first floor, and the owners would live on the second floor. They would, obviously, there was no kitchen and no bathroom when the house was originally built. So when we bought the house, we bought it from a family that had it for about 3 generations. And they were Italian butchers and shop owners. When they got, by the time we bought it from them, it had gone entirely residential. So what you're looking at right now is what used to be their living room and dining room. Took out a couple of walls and set up shop, basically. So the work that you're looking at is mainly of the last 2 years. I've been still continuing with reliefs, though I've started doing just individual figures, and I've been trying to work from the models directly rather than from photographs. This particular standing piece you see here, I started with Jim Vesicino's class last summer, and just finishing it up now.
So Chris, do you work on multiple sculptures at the same, and multiple pieces at the same time?
I do. I find that if I work just one piece at a time, I end up killing it before it's ready. So I do better and can usually maintain a better sense of focus if I work on multiple pieces. So I could, if I get stuck on a piece, I can go to another piece. Or oftentimes, like with the relief series, I worked on 4 or 5 at the same time, and each piece kind of fed the other.
Interesting. So what do you contribute that to, that you do better by working on several pieces at the same time?
I don't know, short attention span. No, I just, when I start, especially when I start series, I want the pieces to have a conversation with each other. So if I can just start several at the same time, I can adjust them to each other as I develop them.
Gotcha. Could we see a little close-up of this piece that you're showing us?
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out what's on its head.
This is, let's see. This is actually a, there we go. This is a maquette for a sculpture of Athena. And this is for the Telfair Museum in Savannah, Georgia. It's the first art museum in Savannah. And originally they had a sculpture director who was also the director of the museum. And he bought several pieces by an Austrian sculptor, Oscar Tilgner rather. And one of them, he bought 5 large sculptures of various portraits done by this man, various artists. And one of them was Phidias, the Greek sculptor of the original Athena. The sculpture itself is probably close to 8 foot tall, and it's on a 2 foot base. And originally in his left hand, he held a small statuette of Athena, but it had gone missing for about 80 years. And they decided that they wanted to replace it. So this is a 15-inch maquette of what I've been able to work from, which are one very old grainy photo.
Wow.
And eventually, if they accept this this version of it, I'll make it about 20, 22 inches. But
Oh,
right
wow.
now, this is just the maquette.
And this right now is like 15 inches, did you say?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah, 15
gotcha.
inches. But it, like a lot of other projects in the arts, is pretty much on hold during these COVID times. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, that Fleisher would understand. I mean, everybody's financing is pretty much cratered. So, but we shall see. But yeah, that's what that one's about.
Very
And
cool.
this one here is one I started actually about a month ago. Let's see how it's showing up.
Well, you did all that work in a month?
Yeah,
I guess you have a lot of time on your hands right now.
yeah, we all do.
Yes.
But let's see here. There we go. Yeah,
I love the skirt. Is that a skirt?
yes.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it's still pretty rough. I'm trying to figure out exactly how I want the drapery to fall. But yeah, this I've had this idea for a while. I just haven't gotten around to actually working on it. And so yeah, when we got presented with an unprecedented amount of time, I just decided to go for it. And it's about 37.5 inches tall.
Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about working on folds and fabric?
Well, I just started actually doing that with the Athena piece. That was my first real attempt at working with
Oh, wow.
fabric and whatnot. It's a whole different aesthetic. I mean, you have to be very conscious of what forms you're trying to emphasize and reveal that carry the movement, and what rhythms you want the fabric to take to also either add to the rhythm or do a counterpoint to the rhythm. You know, what would make sense.
Do you look at paintings of folds or?
Actually, I look at traditions of the other sculptors. So,
Okay.
for instance, this particular pose and whatnot is really based on Indian and Southeast Asian sculptures. And their folds were very, very minimal. But this particular notion was taken up by a lot of sculptors of the Deco period, Art Deco period, both American and European. And to see how they worked with the folds and various styles from, you know, all over the world and all different centuries has been kind of illuminating.
Yeah, that's awesome. Is there significance to the gesture of the hands in this sculpture?
I want them to be in a receiving mode.
Hmm.
So it's kind of based on some Buddhist notions as well as just what strikes me.
Mm-hmm. It is striking. It's a striking pose.
Thank you. Yeah, let's see, what else? Well, this is my bone collection.
Oh, nice. Wow. Where did you get all these bones?
Well, so the first ones I ever got was that one deer skull on the far right with just the two horns. When I was in 9th grade, I lived in Michigan. I had a biology teacher that would take a week or so off in the fall and go up north into the northern parts of Michigan and deer hunt. And he always brought one back. So when he did, he cut off the head and he put it in the beetle terrarium. So we got to watch the beetles basically clean the flesh off the bones in about a week.
That's so gross.
It was very cool. And he said, "Who wants the skull?" And I said, "I do." So that was my first one.
That's a good story.
Yeah. The two human skulls I got from a med student I was dating at Michigan. The two skulls, the hand and the foot, got from her. the arm and the hand I got from another sculptor.
Where did she get all these human
She
bones?
was going to med school, and she said,
They're
"Do you
just
want-"
available?
Well, she said, "Do you want these?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "How did you get them?" And she said, "Don't ask." I said, "All right." So let's see. The other deer skull on the far left, I got when I was camping in an illegal spot in Michigan in a fire zone, and we came across that one. The hip and leg bones I got from actually a lamb, a cut off lamb that we had one time. So I saved those. The little cat skull I actually got when I was down in Georgia doing a restoration job on a plantation, and found this skull in the middle of the yard. But just, yeah, either things that we ate and I saved the bones from, or people have found for me. I've got a friend out near Media who lives across from a park, and he's a metal detectorist, so he goes out, and when he finds a bone, he asks me if I want it. So for instance, let's see, yeah, that one there is a hip bone from a deer, and he found that one for me.
So how does this bone collection connect to your artwork?
Well, when I was in school, one of the projects I took on, it was actually the first direct plaster project I took on. I was working under a different sculptor, John Rush. I studied with Louis Marinero, who was a figurative sculptor, actually from South Philly. But I was studying under John Rush, and I decided to do a direct plaster project. So at Michigan, at the University of Michigan, they had what they called the bone room. And it was a room probably about this size, but it was filled floor to ceiling, wall to wall with flat files. And you would pull out these flat files, much like the Wagner here, and there would be the entire skeleton laid out of a giraffe or a rhinoceros or a anteater or whatever you wanted. So
Wow.
I did a enlargement of a giraffe hip bone. So I just been fascinated with them ever since. I draw from them on occasion, but mainly I just like looking at them.
It feels like there's something about the structural element of skeletons and skeletal bones that, you know, live within a sculpture.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the bones determine how the muscles connect and form around them. And obviously it's the armature of the body. So when I start these pieces, I will start with an armature, a metal armature that's to the proportion and size of a skeleton. It's a obviously very pared down representation of it. But it represents all the major points from the acromion to the trochanters. It'll describe the spine, come up to the top of the head, all the way down to the feet. Describe where the elbows are and where the hands begin. So when I start any of these pieces, I'll pose the armature to the pose directly from the model or whatever idea I've got. And then from there, I begin to lay on the clay.
And how does that work with the reliefs? What do you do for the skeletal structure for those?
Well, it really doesn't play that much of a part other than any subcutaneous bones that you can see. With reliefs, it's like drawing in a way. It's mainly about just blocking the figure in on the flat plane and then building it out so that it conveys the illusion of the figure. But unlike a drawing, it obviously has some dimension, but certainly not to the degree a full-scale sculpture would have. So in other words, this particular relief, let's see, there we go. This particular relief is roughly 30 inches tall by about 18 inches wide. and it's only an inch deep. So if I take you around it, you can see how, let's see, there we go, how it begins to flatten out as you go to the 180. And when I say the 180, sculpture is designed to be seen 360, where the viewing radius of a relief is really only about 180. So the trick is to get it to work as close to the extreme 180 and not just directly in front for the viewer.
It's amazing how much volume it has straight on, and it's almost unbelievable when you go to the side and see how dimensional, how flat it actually is. It's really amazing. How does that happen? What is the trick there? Because like looking at it straight on, it really feels very voluminous.
Well, that is the trick of relief. I think it was, who was it? The sculptor that did the World War II memorial at 30th Street. Shoot, I just lost his name. Anyhow, he said the essential strength, the strength of the relief comes from the essential flatness of it. So it is the magic that something so thin can convey so much volume. But really, if you look at coins, at least the older coins, you'd have to look at a coin probably 20 years ago or before. And if you turn them on their side, you see the various planes start to emerge. So it's all about controlling what's the furthest back in relation to other points. Where's the mid-range? Where's the highest? But it's a discipline that takes a lot of logic. You can't, I mean, yeah, you can't get emotional about it when it doesn't work, because there's always a logical reason, but you have to retain that logic and objective distance the whole time. Otherwise, it just starts falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a
Interesting.
question?
Yeah, of course.
Do you start with drawings before you launch into this?
Yeah, if you look at these over here, this was a drawing I did of a model, and then I transferred that drawing to the board.
Mm.
Now, these have been very tricky in that, like I say, when I did a series of reliefs based on photographs I took, I could logic out the distance and the depth I needed just from the photograph. But I've been working directly from the model with these. And I have found it much more difficult to work directly from the model than to work from the photographs. Partly because photographs make an awful lot of decisions for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just merely a matter of trying to make that work. Whereas when you're working it directly from the model, I would put series of forms down, step back, look, and think, I know this is logically right, measured out, it works, and yet it feels too fat or it feels too tall or whatever. And it's I've had a very hard time transferring what I think should happen to what actually happens, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
Partly, I mean, when I do figures in the round, I can take actual measurements from the model and then just make a ratio of, say, the model's 6 foot and I want to do a 3 foot piece. Any measurement I take of the model, I just divide by 2 and I've got the actual measurement for the piece. Whereas with relief, especially coming off of drawing, it's all subjective because it depends upon your point of view and you're trying to compress, obviously, a three-dimensional object to a two-dimensional plane. And trying to, or making myself trust my subjective measurements has been really hard.
Mm.
Like you think, I got that wrong, I must have that wrong.
Mm.
It doesn't look right. But anyway, that's been a particular challenge. But yeah, these two reliefs, this one started from that, and the same with the other.
Cool. So do you want to either talk about some of the work that we have in images of yours, or would you like to show us your downstairs space? Up to you.
Sure. We can go downstairs. So when I got this space, I wanted to keep the upstairs strictly for drawing and clay sculpting. When you're a sculptor and you're casting and making molds and casting your own work, it tends to get very dirty. And for years, I had a studio in North Philadelphia where everything was on the same floor. And whenever I started molds and casting, it would just trash the place out no matter what. So I decided when I bought this place that I wanted to keep the two functions very separate. So because this place had a basement, and a fairly large basement, with cellar doors to the outside, it was a perfect fit. And just recently, about 2 years ago, I had this trapdoor put in to gain more walking space on the floor. But that basically will lead us into the basement. And so down here is the basement. This is where I do any carpentry work, armature building, casting, mold making, general mayhem. I got about 700 square, as well as storage, as you can see in the back. Got about 700 square feet down here. I recently, last year, had another sculptor by the name of Kate Brockman, who has a foundry and studio, cast up several pieces of mine in aluminum. Let's see if we can get decent light on that. Aluminum is really nice. It's light. I like the color. I like the fact that you don't have to patina it. But it, like a lot
Chris,
of other...
could you tilt your camera a little bit down? We're not seeing it.
Oh, okay.
There you go. It's very shiny.
It is. And that's what's difficult about it. That's actually why I cast in cement for the most part.
Do you patina this?
No, I'm just going to leave it raw. I want to find a flat wax that will at least take down some of the sheen, if there is such a thing. But yeah, it's really, I've never really liked the look of bronze or most metals, only because they're highly reflective. And that's why I've always decided on cement, such as this is a cast, same cast in cement.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about that process? It's quite unique, right? To cast in cement. And can you describe how the process works? How do you make a mold for it? How do you cast out of that material?
Okay, well, we'll start with a relief mold. That's probably the easiest way to describe it. So think of those reliefs you just saw upstairs. I would lay them horizontal like this. And basically I would make a 1/4-inch clay blanket to go over the entire relief. I would then construct a plaster shell on top of that, which you can see under here. Take the shell off, put it back on, leaving the space allowed that the clay was there, pour that full of rubber, and then I have my rubber skin and my plaster shell. And this is actually a relief, or a mold of one of the reliefs.
And where do you go from the mold to the cement? How does that happen?
Okay, so with cement casting, I basically mix in equal parts of weight Portland cement and a very fine sand, like a mortar mesh sand. I mix that with a fortifying acrylic solution. So it's water with an acrylic fortifier. I get it to a slurry that's, it's pourable. It's very pourable. And what I discovered by watching videos on YouTube about casting countertops is I take that slurry and I pour it into this device here, otherwise known as a hopper gun. And it works the same as a spray gun for paint, in that I have a air compressor over here, which I hook up, and I literally will spray it into the mold. And what this does is forces the mixture against the rubber. I build it up. I spray a couple layers till it comes to roughly about an 1/8 inch thick. Wait for that to firm up, and then I'll lay in more mixtures of the plaster or the cement sand, but now mixed with chopped fiberglass. And this provides the reinforcement. It's called GFRC, glass reinforced concrete. And it was used and developed by the British in the 1950s and the Americans in the 60s. And if they basically clad buildings with it. So if you're familiar with the building that used to, on the first floor, have Robinson's Luggage, I think it's Locust and Broad, South Broad, that whole classical facade is done in GFRC.
Very cool.
So that's basically how that happens. If the relief is going to be hung in the interior, like inside a house or a building, I'll only make it roughly 3/8 of an inch thick. If it's going to go outside, I have to go to about 3/4 of an inch thick. But I've always liked the way cement receives light. It's much more gentle in a way, much more like plaster. So there's no reflection coming back at you. And you can read the form much easier.
Mm. Hmm. Very cool.
Let's see. But yeah, this is basically the basement. Tools, equipment, storage of wood.
It's a really nice space.
Yeah, it's worked out fairly well. This is another piece I cast in cement. I have to store it this way just for ease. But with this particular piece, I tried a product put out by the Bear Paint Company. And it's a stain you can put on the cement. So I chose a couple of colors and just sort of mottled it on there. But it both seals the cement and, well, basically seals it and colors it. So you can do a coloration on cement. You can treat cement with color. You can also put color directly into the concrete.
Mm.
So if you've ever gone to a building supply place and they have these rainbow colors, they're dry cement dyes that can mimic brownstone or terracotta, you know, whatever you want. And you can also get water-based pigments as well.
Mm-hmm.
You can start with those.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I'd love to show some more relief images of yours. Maybe if you want to find a spot so you can see them too on your screen. I'm going to share my screen in a second. Okay.
Okay.
So this one, I think you were telling me, is the reference that you make to how does your quote go, that you are modeling on ancient forms but in the present?
Well, this is one of them. This is basically, there was an installation at in Princeton in this alley called Dome Alley. And the people that were organizing the installation wanted to do a tribute to the English Romantic poets. So interestingly enough, in Princeton's collection, they have a collection of death masks, which are, of course, plaster copies of people's faces after they die. They make a mold and then they make a cast. And they had Samuel Taylor Coleridge's death mask. So I started actually with the idea that this would be his gravestone. So I kept it about the size of a gravestone and put dye into the cement to give it that look of slate. And then I just basically modeled his head on top with a little dome. It's sort of a tribute to his Kubla Khan poetry poem. And then just his birth date, his death date, and then I did kind of a ligature of his initials just below his chin. But the other piece that I was thinking about as an archetype was, I think I sent you it, the photo of the Corre piece in front of Woodmere. Yes, that one there. And like I say, that one's definitely based on the Greek and Egyptian Kouros figures. And it's a very simple standing in a walking pose, weight evenly placed between the front and the back leg. And it was an idea that I got actually from an earlier piece that I did, where I had a model come into the studio and she said, "What do you want me to do?" And I say, just stand there. And she took the pose, which was kind of surprising. And I thought, that looks like a Greek Kouros. So when I say that I work from archetypes, it's oftentimes something I observe that makes me go back further in time. I haven't started it yet, but there's an idea I've had where several years ago, I was walking on Passyunk in the middle of the afternoon, and in the distance, I saw a couple walking towards me. And there was just something about the way they walked in their body language that told me that this was one of the first times they were seen as a couple in public. There was something tentative, something declarative about it. And it made me think of the Egyptian pharaoh and queens sculptures that you see, where it's very formal, they're very locked together and both taking a step forward. It's just something about that couple that just like made me think much, much further back. But those are things, when I say, when I work from archetypes, that's what I'm talking about. If I see something that really strikes going way back.
I love that connection to history and to antiquity, that you can summon kind of right in the moment, in the present, on a street in South Philly. That's a beautiful moment. That's cool. So I wanted to chat a little bit about these reliefs, and I'm assuming these are the ones you were saying are from photographs that you took. I would love, I'm a photographer, so a part of me like would love to see those photographs. I'm like, those photographs may be really interesting. But these to me are really different than a sculpture like this, in a sense that they really tend to have so much more narrative about them, and then that relationship between the two figures that seem to be in a kind of heterosexual relationship in a very private, setting of bedroom or living room. And there's like a lot of tension in them and a lot of intrigue. Can you talk a little bit about the work, what inspired you to do these, and what do you see kind of as their essence?
Well, I had never really worked in relief. I did one relief when I was in school, and I remember giving private lessons through Fleisher to somebody about portraiture relief. That was probably would have been 2005, but I hadn't worked much in the medium. But I had been doing years upon years of in the round, as we call it, sculpture. And I really wanted to do something more narrative. And trying to do that in the round would involve an awful lot of stuff. And I felt it would be rather burdensome. And I don't like drawing all that much, and I certainly don't like painting. But I thought I could do this in relief, and I've never actually seen much what I would call domestic interiors done in relief. Very few. There's a Spanish painter, part sculptor, Garcia Lopez, who did some that are just stunning. But for the most part, you don't see it much. I've always been intrigued by the painter Felix Vallotton, by Baltus, Caravaggio, Ian Uglo. How do you put a figure into a setting, and what can you do with that? So I just decided, well, I'm going to do it with relief, but how am I going to get there? So I decided one afternoon I hired a model, and I let her go throughout the entire second floor, and I just photographed her for about 2 hours and took about 300 digital shots. And then about a month later, I hired a male model and did the same with him. Just had him go through the entire second floor, living, bedroom, bathroom, stairs, just photographing whatever they wanted to do. And then I took about a month or two and just looked at the photos and started finding areas where I could combine the two, and setting up different narratives between them once I started combining them. And then it was just really a matter of starting the process and deciding on, of course, size and scale and whatnot. But for a lot of these, like the Diana Baggs of Stag, I literally had printed out one photograph and cut out a figure from another and literally pasted it physically onto the other, and it worked just fine. So that's how I do the composition. I don't do it within Photoshop because I'm not that good with it, but I can do it with a razor and a glue stick.
Nice. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that backstory, because when I see these, they're so solidly visual and present, and the relationship is so important between the two figures that I can't imagine that like the photographs that you took were separated. There were
this one, actually, I did bring in the models together because there were a couple things that I wanted to try, and I needed them both there to try them. And I did try them, and I didn't like them. And we had about 30 minutes left, so I said, do whatever you want. And it worked out really well because the male model was an actor, Frank Bruckner, and the female model was a musician. So they were both used to improvising, and they actually hit it off really well with each other. So they just started going through a series of poses that was just magical. It was great. So I just snapped off a bunch of pictures, and this was one of the ones I decided on. But
What about
I'm sorry?
what about the figures in the background? Is that from a
Those
photograph
were
too?
actually based off of a Mayol sculpture, Aristide Mayol. And so I wanted, because when they took this, it made me think of that one a lot, and I wanted that to be sort of a counterpoint. You know, it's almost like, I always saw this piece taking place at night. I don't know why, I saw it as a nighttime piece. And so it's almost as if there's been an impasse between some kind of an intimacy, and neither one wants to leave, but they don't know where to go. And the Mayol one is I don't remember the exact title in French, but it's basically, I think it's called resistance of some sort. So there's, the male is trying to overpower the female, and she will not, she's resisting that overpowering presence. But I just wanted to be sort of a counterpoint to what was happening.
Yeah, it's a relief within a relief. It's kind of like a stage within a stage. It's interesting. I like that meta narrative of that. What about this one? Why is the lamp unplugged?
Well, you'll notice that the light bulb is an energy-saving light bulb.
It is.
I don't know. I see it as kind of a humorous piece, in a way. And I just thought, unplug the lamp and let it be absurd. But when I was working on it, I kept thinking, it looks like they're both staring at a TV. So that's why I called it a view from the box. Plus the dimensions of it now are, fairly close to most flat screen TVs. When I started it, the flat screens were just starting to come in. So it was kind of a happy accident.
Nice. Yeah. Well, I have a couple more questions for you. I'm just going to stop sharing because I think we've looked at all the, I believe we've looked at all of these. Oh, this one we haven't seen. Yeah, sorry, go on.
When I was going through and photographing, I wanted the point of view to be very active in the conversation. So, how the camera was pointed, from what's the point of view of the viewer onto the subject. Like I say, I wanted that to be a very active part of the conversation. So when I was choosing various ones, it's because I really thought the point of view would take you into the piece.
And is this meant to be a diptych?
It didn't start out that way, but again, I was working on several at the same time. So as I started really completing them, I did start working it as a diptych. So originally, there wasn't the large knife in the one on the right. And at the same time, I almost thought it to be a triptych if I combined it with another one called Enthroned. So you would have the one on the left that you see is called Beseeching. There'd be a center one called Enthroned, in which the figure is squarely on the chair, and it's a much larger panel. And then the one on the right, entitled Deposed, where he's no longer on the chair. So I started thinking of the chair as actually a throne. So it's sort of like bidding for power, getting power, and then out of power.
Really interesting. Well, thanks so much for talking about these. I'm going to stop sharing. Wondering if anyone else has any questions before I shoot some questions as well.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
What's the scale of those relief pieces that you were just showing?
So the diptych ones, they're both about 2 foot by 3 foot.
Hmm.
The one with the two figures seemingly staring at a TV, that's about I think 2830 by 50 something.
Wow.
The one with the two figures on the couch is 3 foot by 4 foot.
Hmm.
And the one of
Wow.
Coleridge is roughly 2 by 3.
Thanks.
Yeah, they're very impressive in person. I've seen them in person
They're
at the
beautiful.
faculty exhibitions, and they really are. And they're cement as well?
Yeah, they were all cement. The one on the couch I had aluminum leafed. I was curious what that would look like. But yeah, they're all cast in cement. I'm going to actually, I've got the mold set up downstairs because I'm going to cast that one that has the knife, the large knife on the floor. I'm going to actually cast that in a product called aqua resin, which is just a lightweight water-based resin. And I'm going to have a colleague of mine paint it realistically for me.
Oh, wow.
Photorealism. I've always been curious to see what that would look like. So I've sent her photos of the piece. And then, of course, once I get it cast, I'll get her the cast. But I'm curious to see what that will look like.
And what is she painting it in oils or acrylics?
Actually, casein.
Oh,
So
I don't think I know what that is.
casein is a water-based or a milk-based paint. This piece here is painted in casein. So that cast, I originally, when I made it, I put orange red dye into the plaster. But when I finished it, I decided to paint it with casein. And the reason being is casein dries really flat and it doesn't look like paint. Because most oils or acrylics always have a bizarre sheen to them that just says paint right away. Or casein, unless you buff it, it just stays flat. So it's kind of, it talks about the color rather than the finish.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna read Christine's question that just came in. Christine Blair. She's saying, I know you're a very skilled anatomical sculptor, and you said you're not a drawer and do not want to do it or painting as a 2D artist who has studied drawing and anatomy and done a very tiny bit of figurative sculpture in drawing class as an undergrad. I'm just curious how drawing could not come into play.
When I do figure drawing, I do it to observe. Not so much to make a drawing as to really intensify the observation that I do. And it is obviously, rather than abstracting the form that I see in the model to a three-dimensional object, it's a different type of abstraction to put it on to a two-dimensional surface. But it's really about the observation and transferring that information that makes me see and look much more intensely. And it's really about that for me. I keep telling myself one of these days I'll sit down and try to do serious drawings, but I just never get around to it.
Makes sense.
As far as painting goes, I mean, I see color. I took color classes and I passed them. But I don't think in color for the most part. I appreciate it when I can discern possibly, say, what Bonnard was trying to do as opposed to Degas or Rembrandt or, whomever. I love Bellows' palette in landscapes and how he could just move that paint and make it so physical. But for the most part, I really just don't think that way. And yeah, I don't think that way. I appreciate it when others do. And then you can tell when somebody really thinks in color. But it doesn't reside in this one.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much, Chris. That's all the questions that I have. Unless anyone else has any questions, we're just going to give you a moment if you're typing them. Or Chris, if you have anything else to add.
Not that I can think of at the moment.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chris, for having us in your space and showing us your amazing work. It's been really great to talk to you and get your perspective on your work. And thank you, everyone else, for joining us tonight. It's been really great having you. Join us again tomorrow night. We will be doing another webinar, demonstration webinar on silver point drawing. And I think, Chris, you wanted to take that class.
Yes.
And we'll be doing just a quick demonstration of the process. And silver point is a Renaissance kind of ancient process of drawing on metal. So if you're interested, join us tomorrow night at 6:30. Otherwise, so nice to see so many familiar faces, so many familiar names. Have a great evening and stay safe, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.